You're on with Lauren Zayu for Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered, a show about what you say, how you say it, and what to do after it's said. We'll talk about communications and messaging blunders, successes, distractions, and what all of it means for you. Join me for a crash course in what you need to know in politics and issues driving the 2020 elections. Hello and welcome to Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. I'm your host, Lauren Zayu. Last night was the final, or some say only, presidential debate between Vice President Joe Biden and President Donald Trump. And today I have with us two policy experts to talk through what mattered and what didn't. I also think it's important to note that last night was the only presidential debate hosted by a Black woman, NBC's Kristen Welker, and she also did a phenomenal job. Keeping that in mind, I want to go ahead and bring on our guests today, who I'm sure are going to tell us a great iteration of what's occurred. I'm happy to welcome to Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered, Travis Randle and Sakeenah Shabazz.
Hey, y'all.
Hello.
I'm excited to get started again. As I brought you in, you are policy experts that are going to tell us what's going on today. And but first, I guess let's get the viewers and listeners cued in on who you are and some of your stories. So, Travis, if you'll kick us off.
All right. Well, first of all, Lauren, thank you so much. It's pretty cool. I must say this is my first kind of podcast situation, so I'm excited to. I hope I don't look crazy on camera, but nevertheless. So my name is Travis Randle. Graduated from Morehouse 2012. Did my public policy work at the University of Chicago, and I recently graduated from Howard University School of Law. And as of 3 weeks ago, started practicing at law firm. I practice environmental law, but I think I've always been a politics enthusiast since I think maybe 2000, and we all know the significance of 2000 in electoral history. But glad to be here tonight.
Glad to have you, Sakeenah.
Hey, y'all. Lauren, thanks for having me. I'm Sakeenah Shabazz, and I'm currently a first-year Master's of Public Policy student at the University of California Goldman School of Public Policy at Berkeley. And prior to being in school or Zoom grad school for the last couple months, I used to work at the Congressional Hunger Center here in Washington, D.C., and also at D.C. Hunger Solutions as an anti-hunger program associate. So it's good to be in school and, sort of learning about these things in a more formal setting versus, on the job. So it's good to be here.
Very cool. So kind of starting us off, since we have ended debate season, right? We had the vice presidential debate, a canceled debate, a hot mess to open it, and then last night's debate. I'm wondering, of the range of topics discussed, was there anything you thought should have gotten attention and didn't? Like an issue that we went the whole cycle without discussing? Sakeenah, we can start with you.
Sure. I think Vice President Joe Biden touched on it very briefly yesterday, but just the issue of food insecurity and how that's significantly increased over the course of the pandemic. I think he talked about it more anecdotally about, families that are participating more in the SNAP program. He referred to it as food stamps, which is the old name of the program. But I think highlighting issues of hunger and food insecurity are really important. And the current administration has not shown any favor towards that program. And through every budget that's come out of the White House on an annual basis has proposed cuts to the program. And so I think putting issues of food insecurity front and foremost are always important. Every person needs to eat. And I think that in larger conversations just around unemployment and healthcare and just sort of thinking about the livelihoods of people, it's come up through there. But I think shining a light on that very specifically is something that both candidates can give more attention to.
I definitely see that. What about you, Travis?
It's interesting to me that over the course of this campaign, we've not really heard or talked about queer issues, particularly around trans people. And I think this is important because the Trump administration has been, for as much as Trump kind of gets out there, he hosts a pride event at the White House with the log cabin Republicans and says that, I support gay people, I support queer folk, I support trans people. First president, looking at, if you contrast this administration to the Obama administration, once again, got rid of reinstated the ban on trans people serving in the military, took away some of those privileges for those trans folk in the military. And we also have a Supreme Court Justice nominee in Amy Coney Barrett, who while her tenure on the at least on the federal bench has been short, and she does not have enough opinions to judge her by this, we also know what her personal politics are, right? And your personal politics have a lot to do with your view of the public and society. And so I think that we, given no matter what happens with the election with Trump, right? I think that now that the court will potentially have a 6-3 conservative bent to it, I think spells some doom for queer folk and trans folk. And once again, the Obergefell decision allowing those of us who count ourselves to be gay or who call ourselves to be gay or queer to marry. And two, what do we do when it comes to employment discrimination and a host of other issues, medical issues, et cetera. And that's unfortunate that we didn't get a chance to talk about that this cycle.
I agree with both of you. I definitely think it's interesting, even with a variety of debate moderators across various networks, they kind of all focused on the same general topics, like there was race, there was climate change, there was all these different things. And I guess maybe 6 or so central topics that I now looking back on, it would have been interesting to see any of them lean in on some of the other more niche areas that we talked about. And I feel like something that doesn't get enough light, especially I think what I'm missing most is the primary for Democrats. We had more than we could name on two hands, right? It was so many people. But what we got in that was everybody kind of had their market and everyone was sort of catered to in a way that I would have liked to see this administration more vocally bring everyone into the fold and decide to how I would say kind of take all of those specialties seriously, right? I don't feel like we had a real, it touched on labor, right? And the issues with workers and worker rights, which was something that Senator Sanders was really big on. I feel like Elizabeth Warren had a really particular understanding of policy from a procedural level that I understand cannot be as palatable on a debate stage, but I would like to see that show up more in the campaign. And so to have had such a diverse coalition of Democrats come forward and pursue the presidency, I feel like we've kind of ended up with at least not as verbally diverse, if that's a diversion that we're interested in, for this. And so I would have liked to see that. But kind of under that same idea, transitioning into Hold Up, where we discuss, what something we wish had gotten more spotlight. I would like to see the healthcare conversation move past who has a plan and who doesn't.
Yeah.
They get up there and they go back and forth. Trump says he has one, Biden says he doesn't, and that kind of ends the conversation. And so I would have liked to hear more specifics on the Democrat plan that exists. So yes, you have one, but also tell us what's in it. So the public option, what does that look like? How does that expand? Who does that touch? How is that different than Medicare for all? Are we building towards Medicare for all? I felt like there wasn't room for that. But I guess in this conversation, Travis, is there anything you want us to hold up and give more time to?
So watching the debate last night, I think we all can agree that yes, the adults were in the room yesterday, and shout out to the moderator. She Kristen Welker was just absolutely flawless in how she handled both of them, particularly the president, but both candidates. But with that being said, I thought that it was a great slew of questions or issues to talk about. 3 areas really kind of got under my belt. So one, taxes, right? And I think the taxes conversation is important too. If you are a person who is concerned about the government's ability to create social safety net, right? For those of us, for those, not us, but those who are under the poverty line, those who are the working poor, the tax conversation was very personal yesterday. Trump, what are your taxes? You didn't pay taxes. Well, we also need to just kind of we should have kind of put a pin and pause and really discuss the fact that a year ago, the president passed a $1.5 trillion tax cut bill, got rid of a lot of exemptions for a lot of working families. And what you saw is a massive, once again, over the past 10 years, we've seen this, but once again, another redistribution of wealth to the top 5%, particularly the top 1%. And so not even being able, and it's interesting because Biden also released his tax plan, and it was in the news cycle a couple of days before the debate. So I thought that might have come up. I mean, and we all know that what 50 Cent felt about Biden's tax plan. The next issue for me, and I think it speaks to at least the work that I do professionally, is climate change. I think that climate change it's something that Democrats always talk about. It's something that Republicans never talk about. And I think that yesterday, the conversation around fracking, around oil, once again, it pushed it. There was a segment around climate change, but we really didn't talk about it in the way that we should have. I think that I wish the moderator's question would have been a little bit more pointed to President Trump, particularly around some of the rollbacks, because he keeps saying we have the cleanest air, the cleanest water, we're getting rid of waste, but you roll back all of these you also believe in getting rid of regulatory red tape, and so those two things are not synonymous. And I would have really wanted to hear more from Vice President Biden, given that he is not really a big fan of the Green New Deal. And so what does your world, the world of environmental justice, of environmental regulation, look like under the Biden administration? And I think finally, the prevailing theme on this election has been around moral leadership, right, and character. And I think that, once again, these are themes that popped up in between the two candidates as they jab back and forth. But I think that given the past 4 years that we've had, that should have been a conversation about what does it mean to be president? What does that look like? What actions should a president engage in, and shouldn't a president engage in? What does it mean to be a leader and to bring people together? And so while those issues were disparate, they were addressed in a disparate fashion, right? I think a line of questioning or several questions around what does character and leadership look like, I think would have been important as a closing conversation for voters as they're making that decision.
I agree, Travis. And what I want to stick on is your last point a little bit, in that it kind of clicked for me maybe a little later, but the reason that I think Joe Biden is the candidate for America right now is because so many people are experiencing grief. And grief, unfortunately, for Vice President Biden is something he's very familiar with in a way that the president is not. And so I think that was what clicked for me yesterday. I was like, oh, policies are what they are. He's in the center a bit more than I would like on some things. I also can see how this would be palatable for right now. And we do know that politics is so much of timing. And so Vice President Biden has run for president multiple times. And so there was a really solid push for him to run in 2016 as well. Unfortunately, because of the passing of his son, he decided not to, due to the unfortunate passing of his son. But it is something, I think, that the moral leadership and the character element is something that they're driving home right now. And I actually do think that's a solid point for them. Sakeenah, what did you look at in the debate last night and say, like, hold up, we need to spend some more time here?
One of the things that really stuck out to me when Vice President Biden was talking about criminal justice reform, and as it particularly relates to drug offenses, was his point was like, people need treatment, not incarceration. And he kept reiterating that. And that stuck out to me so much, because that's not something that we would hear from President Trump, but what it actually looks like to remodel punishment and remodel what it looks like for someone to actually be rehabilitated from substance abuse and things like that, and just to not automatically turn to the penal system as a solution for that. And so I wish that there was more time to expand on that, but those questions, they have like 2 minutes to answer and 30 seconds to respond to the other candidate, and so they didn't get to linger there for too long. Also, to Travis's point about leadership at the end, that was like, it was really astounding to just hear hopefully President Biden articulate what his vision for moral leadership looks like as a president. One of the things that I've just been learning about in a public management class that I'm in right now is just about transactional leadership versus transformational leadership. We know what transactional leadership looks like. We're seeing it right now in the White House. And I think that it would be really astounding to move back to a transformative model and just thinking more broadly about recovery for the country versus just being tit for tat. And so that was something that really stuck out to me. I wish that there was a conversation about student loan debt and higher education for people who are either going into community college or going into undergrad or pursuing their graduate studies. It feels particularly salient for me because I'm in school right now. And fortunately, I'm from California. I was educated in the public school system and I attend a public university now. And I feel like they've been quite generous with my own schooling. But I do know for a lot of my peers, the burden of student loan debt is significant, not just on your ability to purchase a home or to take care of your livelihood or to take care of your family, but also the toll it takes on your mental health. And so one of the potential candidates earlier, Senator Elizabeth Warren, spoke heavily to that. And it just I think it appealed to a lot of young people too, as well with Senator Sanders, as he's talked about eliminating a big chunk of student loan debt for a lot of people in this country. But I wish that was something that took a little bit more of a front seat, because that's really something that determines folks' livelihood and their ability to just live the lives that they want to, and to pursue education and contribute to the economy, whatever community that they're in. And so I wish that had a little bit more attention, and we'll see what that looks like going forward. But those are the things that stick out to me.
I would definitely want to sit there and talk about the student loan debt piece. It does pertain to me personally, but also I think that it's something Democrats have waffled on. Like, I remember when in 2016, when Sanders comes out and is like, free college, everybody's like, what? College can't be free. And by the time we get to 20, several people on stage have it as a part of their platform. But what I want to take a second to say, I want the messaging to that to move from being a millennial issue. This impacts our parents as well, because my undergraduate degree, that's parent plus loans. That wasn't me. And so when we talk about just it impacting millennials, like, my parents ended up taking out this debt later in life in order to put me through school. And so it impacts them in their finances as well. And so I think there's this notion that, like, oh, those kids, they just want free college. But in reality, like, this can impact generations. Like, I had friends whose grandparents mortgaged their house so they could go to college, right? Had people who really ended up with like generational type of debt trying to create generational wealth. And so I definitely think the student loan conversation needs to be had in a bigger way than just millennials, because it's impacting everyone.
And it has a much more deleterious effect on African-American students who are pursuing higher education as well. And that debt management is extremely difficult. And there was a report that came out, I'm not going to say don't quote me on it, but it was a report that came out that talked about African-American homeowners paying more taxes based off of the appraisals of their home. So imagine having the compounded effect of student loan debt and actually trying to, secure wealth for your family, either through home ownership or just trying to make more sound decisions with money, and then still being in a system that doesn't prioritize your financial well-being because of the color of your skin and because of institutional racism. And so those two things go hand in hand, and it's really hard to untangle them. And one of the things that President Trump said yesterday too is, I've done the most for historically Black colleges and universities, and it's like, sir, no, I think the president thinks he's been the best thing for a lot of Black people and for Black people as a whole. And not to say that HBCUs should not have more investment, and then they absolutely should. They're important institutions, and a lot of people receive stellar educations from them. But I think that the decision to say that you've done the best thing for them since whoever is probably just like factually incorrect, and is really not appropriate framing to take for institutions of that nature. So.
And I think to that point, he also just kind of casually forgets there's like a House and the Senate, and for sure, the Democratic caucus, I know for a fact, had more to do with the appropriations process, and he just got the chance to do a photo op with the president, with name on it, right? Like all those stimulus checks, but neither here nor there. But I think to the kind of going along with this conversation around student loan debt, financial, the ability to be financially self-determined. I think one of the failures, I think, of this cycle, and I think of both of these candidates, and I fault both of them because they're a little older, and I think that these issues, they're far removed from these issues, that I think neither of them have really articulated a general, broad vision for how government works. And I think that when we talk about, I think I don't know which one of you raised or mentioned Senator Warren, who, to be full transparency, was my preferred candidate in the
yes.
For whatever people may say about Senator Warren, I think that if she were in the race today, I think she'd be ahead and probably a comfortable margin. But I think what was so encouraging about her platform is that it was interconnected, right? That the social issues are connected to the financial issues, they're connected to tax issues, they're connected to education issues. And if we start to look at how government works, there's no way that you can take one issue out and everything else is not affected by it. And so I think if we kind of going along with this theme of what we should have heard more, I think that neither one of them, and President Trump, I mean, to be very real, I'm not wasting my time expecting him to talk about that. I will say for Vice President Biden to have been a United States Senator for over 30 years, served in President Obama's administration for 8 years, I did expect him to talk a bit more about how all these things flow together, because it matters, right? And I think particularly with the student loan issue, listen, we can't deal with student loan issues until we deal with big banks, right? Those things are, once again, they're fundamentally connected. And one thing that President Trump said, once again, he's the bad messenger. He made a point. He's like, well, Biden, you're kind of wrapped up with these big banks. Obviously, he's not indebted for $100 million like the current office holder. But nevertheless, I think there is a question of, and once again, this is the important part about why we should have 3 debates and why we should thoroughly vet these candidates. You really can't walk into the White House, as we've seen with President Trump, trying to be tactical with your administration. There has to be an overarching goal in mind.
I agree, and sort of in this conversation of what we would have heard more about, so fair enough. We watched the debate. We're politics, policy nerds. Fine. But let's say I'm Joe Blow in Kansas or Nebraska or Joisha Blow, like whatever the situation is. What do you think is the takeaway from last night, as far as a standard, not like your big takeaway as far as impression of the candidates, but a moment that you think voters of all stripes said, whoa, that mattered?
I think yesterday the conversation around family separation as it pertains to immigration was a real sticking point. And there was a moment where the moderator was, trying to get Vice President Biden to sort of, wrap up his final point around the 545 children who have been separated from their parents, which is absolutely atrocious. It is a violation of human rights, and the mental toll that it is going to take, or has already taken, on those children and on their parents. And for President Trump to frame that as they're just being brought here by smugglers, they're just being brought here by coyotes, didn't come with their parents, is factually incorrect. And I think really reflects a disdain and a lack of empathy towards people who are trying to find a better life for themselves, especially coming from Central and South America, for the children that are detained right now. But when Vice President Joe Biden was trying to make the point that your policies made this happen, and then the clip kind of cut out, and President Trump said "good" at the end. Yeah. It was kind of like, what do you mean this is good? And I feel like for any person who listened to that and heard his final point on that be good, that that his policies were harsh, that children have been separated from their families, should really signal to them that this person is treating the worst among you like trash. Like their lives are disposable. Like the separation of their families is an acceptable thing to uphold and to continue into what another administration can look like. And, I think the points on healthcare were important. The points on climate change were important. But I just think in terms of the family values that a lot of conservatives really try to put forward is not reflected in the policies that mediate and determine how people who come to this country seeking asylum or just seeking a better life for themselves are treated. And I think that should be a determining factor. I think that should be a stronger point that should sway people to vote against the person who is touting that and who is responsible for those policies. That was just a really salient point. I was following along on social media, and a lot of people were just really astounded by that point. And I really think it should hit people harder than it has. And that's not to say that a lot of people haven't given it attention. The family separation policy of this administration has been clearly documented, along with other measures like the travel ban and things like that. But I don't know what else people need to see to not vote for him again.
Yeah, that was cringeworthy, to say the least. Like it wasn't. Well, Trump hasn't had really any good moments in the past week or so, but that was one that wasn't a good one. I think there are two issues. I think that the average voter really, when they saw this, I think it sealed the deal for them, or at least if they were wavering, would probably help them to make a decision. The first thing, and I think this kind of speaks to empathy. It's not. There are actually two moments in the debate. The first moment is during the conversation around COVID. Biden, kind of entered the conversation very, very strong and kind of engaged in this onslaught against the president for the first 10 minutes, pretty much saying you don't have a plan. And President Trump, when they asked him, did he take responsibility? He said, I take responsibility. And then for the next 5 minutes, well, 2 minutes really, and it felt like he talked for probably 5 minutes after that, he engaged in kind of the art of the politics of grievance and complaints about everybody else and what they didn't do, and Biden and H1N1, as though anybody remembers what H1N1 is. But the inability to say, yes, made a mistake. Maybe our response wasn't as quick, as acute as it should have been. Contrast that to Vice President Biden later on in the evening, the conversation around criminal justice. Trump is pushing him, and I think quite effectively, on the crime bill. And Biden eventually says, listen, I'm sorry. That wasn't the intended effect. We made a mistake. And I think I say this for two reasons. One, across the board, I think most Americans will say, if I can't elect a president who makes a mistake that has at least 220,000 bodies as evidence of your mistake and not say sorry, I think that says something, right? The inability to be introspective. But I think for Vice President Biden, I think that was a moment of humility that you don't see from a lot of politicians. Saying sorry. Listen, Hillary Clinton was a favorite candidate of mine. And I also tell people to this day, her major weakness is not being able to just say, I made a mistake. I effed up. And to see Vice President Biden really have a conversation with Black America, right? That's something that I think probably didn't get a lot of coverage and people didn't really hear it, but he said, I'm sorry. And I made a mistake. I think the second issue that I think when voters really go into cast their ballot, right? The question is, who do I think will defend me? I think if that's the question, or who's going to have my best interest at heart, if that's the question that they're going to be making a decision for president on, the exchange on China ended with Vice President Biden pivoting, turning to the camera and saying, we're making this about our families, but it's about your family. And then President Trump comes in and taunts him and says, well, look at you, you're being a politician, you're getting in the camera, and he's mocking him and he's doing this Trump short arm thing and engaging in the performance and the theatrics of Trumpism. But in that moment, I can tell you right now, what people love about Joe Biden is that he can take these very lofty, heady, very wonky topics and issues and break it down and be able to at least connect it back to people's everyday pocketbook, kitchen table issues. And so for Trump to say that, right? Oh, you're talking about families. Well, yeah, that's why you're running for president, right? Everything you're doing to this point is about other families. And so Trump's failure to see the mistake in that, and the fact that he so easily walked into that trap, right, says a lot about where his interests lie, right? And it's not about making sure that the American people feel safe, that they feel that they have a president that empathizes with him. He's only concerned with just raw power and raw politics. Am I making the numbers that I have that I can get to become president? And so I think those two issues are going to resonate for voters.
I think both of you made really great points. Similarly, I do think that a lot of last night was not good for the president. It's weird. He does this thing where he starts out on message and Twitter and punditry goes abuzz like, oh my gosh, he's so presidential. He's turning the corner. Keep in mind, we're still talking about turning the corner. We're 4 years into his presidency, but okay. And then like around 15, 20 minutes, it's almost like he starts jerking like, oh, God, can't handle it. And then he goes nuts. And so, but in a moment last night when he was attempting to be on message and he said of COVID-19, which is what the 220,000 bodies that are at his door and blood is on his hands about, said we are living with it.
It's a problem.
220,000 people are not, sir.
Exactly.
And Vice President Biden says, actually, we're dying with it, or we're learning to die with it. I said, now that's the clip. Yeah. Cut it, send it, write the email. That's it. Because that is the conversation that you're having. That some people that you earnestly think 220,000 bodies. And that's what we know, right? We also know the CDC doesn't have to account for these numbers to the public anymore. We know that the states are kind of, sending up whatever they think is relevant at the time. And so the idea that even with numbers like that, and we don't even know that that's all of it, that coldness of a response, that for you, even with over 200,000 people dead, we're living with it, open back up, we're the greatest economy. We have to, that's really something that I really, it was a moment for me even watching it, like, oh, we are, this is the contrast.
Right.
And then the second one was, so there's been this buzz in print journalism, I don't know if it's real or not, but about while President Trump is rapidly losing every demographic, he's growing with Black men. We've and Latinx men, that's true. And we've seen the increase with, or we've seen like, I think, Ice Cube and 50 Cent and like all this.
Kanye.
Right, Kanye for whatever he was, all that.
Right.
And so I thought Kristen Welker bringing up the talk, that we all know what it is. We've had it in various forms. And the lack of sympathy and empathy had there. If I'm a Black man watching this, right, and I've had the talk, maybe I've given the talk to my children, and the person on the, I guess, left side of my screen wants to not even engage with the question and doesn't really have any sympathy for that, I think that's a moment as well. I even think about the Central Park, the Exonerated Five, and the fact that President Trump took out his own money to put out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for their death. Mm-hmm. And even after exoneration, will not recant his words. Like, I think that there's something to be said as a Black man engaging with that information, and that's something that would stick with me going into the polls.
Yeah. That particular issue was, I think, another cringeworthy moment, because it was he literally spent maybe 5 seconds responding to it. Yes, he literally said yes. And I think, once again, I always think about how moderators can really change the moment, right? And I understand that moderators really want to remain neutral, but this is a moment where you really can push the president. Yes, what? Like, yes, and this is the open-ended answer. This is not the direct questioning answer. And so even in that moment, but once again, and then pivots to attack, right? And I think that shows, once again, raw power, raw politics, not really concerned about the everyday lives of Americans. That moment, if there's any Black man out there, and I'm just going to speak to you all right now, if you all are still considering voting for Trump, we all need to have a conversation, because this man clearly did not. He did not have any interest in engaging. And even, let's be clear, two white men on a stage having a conversation about the talk is always going to be a spotty, shaky topic, right? But we can at least appreciate Vice President Biden's ability to bring personal narrative to the conversation, right? Personal narrative to the conversation, to say, I'm a white man from Delaware. I have a daughter. I don't get it. But what I do know is that because I don't get it, that's the problem, right? It was... I stopped at a certain point. I had to bring out the whiskey. At that point, I was like, it's not worth my time to watch this anymore. But
the point that he brought up yesterday about the talk, or the point that the moderator brought up yesterday about the talk, and how disparate the answers were between President Trump and Vice President Joe Biden, was very illuminating. Mm-hmm. And I think that Vice President Biden talking about his daughter and the degree that she has in social work, like the point you brought up around narrative, is really important. And I think also, Lauren, to your original question, just around this like growing trend of men of color, particularly Black and Latinx men, aligning themselves with a president who they perceive themselves to have formality with, mm-hmm. or this person is somehow going to listen to them or bring elevation to a platform or particular set of issues that they care about, while actively not listening to other Black men and other Black women who are like, no, this is not the way to go. And other Latinx women, and other women of color, Indigenous women, who are also actively organizing and bringing attention to issues that are pertaining to their community. That is a really growing concern. Brittany Cooper, who is a professor, I believe, at Rutgers University, and authored Eloquent Rage, had some really verbose tweets about Black women in particular who chose to support Trump, and talked a little bit about Ice Cube. And I think that the trend to sort of like seek power in that very false way is very concerning. And one of the things that she alerted us to was, don't be what white women voters were in 2016, when 53% of them voted for President Trump. And I think it would just be really sad if that turned out to be the case, and really disappointing. And like you said, Travis, like warrants an internal conversation with people who look like us about their decisions and what would drive them to vote in that way. But I think the conversation just more broadly around race and around injustice and police violence, I felt like didn't get as much attention that the moderator could have given it. We're coming out of a summer where we literally saw so many people who look like us killed by the police, where we saw people protesting in the streets in June, where we saw, different parts of communities that we live in set ablaze out of frustration and out of anger with a system that dehumanizes people who look like us. And, the decision to re-elect a president that has disregard for that, who is falsely quoting Black Lives Matter as saying police officers are pigs in a blanket, or pigs in bacon, or something, like just some, like, who said that? No one said that as part of the Black Lives Matter movement. Like, where did you get this from? Lets me know that, 4 more years of a presidency like this will only lead to more violence, will only lead to more protests. And that's not to say that our voices should not be raised in that way. But the question that the moderator asked specifically around what it is like for Black folks to have that talk with their children, both boys and with girls, because police violence is also an issue that affects Black women and girls and trans women in particular, really lets me know that Vice President Joe Biden is thinking about those things. He's not going to be the end-all, be-all solution to that. We are going to be the solution to that, but knowing that there is a candidate in place who is actively thinking about those things in a thoughtful manner. And to your point around narrative and being able to speak to people is really important. And I don't want to think what that will be like with 4 more years of a Trump presidency. I think it would be very violent, and I think it would be bad for people who look like us. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. It doesn't feel positive or very bright. So
I think to that, to even add on your point, and whoever's elected, right? I think that this summer, for those of us who are people of color, right, we are not surprised by the Proud Boys, by Charlottesville, by what happened in Minnesota, in Kentucky. This is not surprising to us. America, listen, we know why people wear cosmetics. It's to sometimes hide as opposed to clear up, right, issues, right? And so in the same way, America has done a great cosmetic work on its narrative. But I do think going forward, the question that we have to start asking our politicians is, one, do you believe in systemic racism, right? And that's been happening quite a bit, right? You have people, Mitch McConnell and a few others have, chimed in on this question, and they don't believe in systemic racism. Fine. But we have to force the question, if you don't believe in systemic racism, why do you think that X group is, that they have their home ownership is 20 points lower than white people? Why do you think
I say it's a lack of personal responsibility?
And part of it is I want to get them on the record, because I want those, and to that point, I want those Black men out there once again who are somehow, they feel some fealty to Trump. As I told my roommate yesterday, I think Black men will have to have a conversation about our desire to be white men, but that's for a different conversation, a different day. I don't.
Let me pencil you in to come back to that conversation. We can definitely have that conversation.
My sister teed it up when she mentioned Brittany Cooper. She teed it up when she mentioned Brittany Cooper. I was like, no, please talk about that, right? But I want to put these policies on the record, right? And I wish that question would have been asked to President Trump, because we know that he would have said, no, he doesn't believe in systemic racism. And I want to push him on those points, right? Because I want him to be forced to say, no, you Blacks don't have the same work ethic that I did, right? You Blacks have not, you guys don't save your money, right? And we know fundamentally Trump is the epitome of white mediocrity, right? We get that, right? Once again, I saw a meme that said, got babies, mamas, owes, has debt and got warrants from different states, right? Like, so fine, you want to talk about ghetto, that is Trump, right? But we have to, I think we get caught up in the power, the projection of power that people like Trump provide us, right? And I'm speaking particularly of men, Black men. I think for those Black men who have lost their mind, right? that projection of power, we get caught up in that, and we're not thinking about how does this man look at us when he closes the door, right? What does he say about us? What does he think about our personhood, right? And that's something that can never be rehabilitated in Trump's eyes, right? We will always be a pawn on his chess table. And that, I think, was very frustrating. I think the egregious nature with which he kept mentioning black men, black men, black men. I was like, do you really? I mean, there can be a few crazies out there, but he also takes us for granted, right? He takes us for being fools that if I just say black men 5 times in crime bill, that means a vote for Trump, or at minimum, lack of a vote, taking away a vote from Biden. We got to have a deeper conversation about that going forward, though.
I agree. There are many internal conversations to be had on various topics surrounding electoral politics, definitely. But keep in the interest of time and transitioning into I ain't sorry. Something I wanted to broach is like something that you might be unapologetic about, or something that you either in your personally that you believe, politically that you believe, something that came up last night. For me, I think right now, after last night's debate, I am unapologetic about the power that the presence of a confident Black woman has on white supremacy in a space. As in real life, I was on Twitter last night. I'm like, this is a Kristen Welker Stan account. Like this is where we are. One, I thought she did leaps and bounds better than her counterparts. And I'm including the vice presidential debate in that. Leaps and bounds. I thought she held her own well. She took on 2 of the most powerful white men in the world and did not back down, right? I think that is harder to do. And that's something I normally give moderators credit on. I, unfortunately, have never had the pleasure of telling a president of the United States to be quiet or that we are moving on. And so I can imagine the intimidation factor, no matter how much preparation you have. And so I thought that she did a fantastic job on that. And I do think it speaks to a larger narrative of confronting white supremacy and what the power that a confident Black woman has in the space. And so I don't know how it will impact decisions made about who moderators are moving forward. We know that in media and in journalism, like all fields, there's a diversity problem. And so I know for a fact Kristen Welker worked very hard to get to where she is. And I hope there is I know that there is a bench of talented Black women who are able to take on that position. And I hope that networks take that seriously in the future when choosing these moderators, particularly when we have candidates like the one who unfortunately represents the United States right now. That's what I'm not sorry about. But Travis, what are you unapologetic about?
I think after this debate, and it has little to do with the actual debate, I think I left out of this debate recognizing how important the stakes in this election are. And we hear this every cycle. Like, this is the greatest election, the most important election. We hear this, right? I left out of this election unapologetic about the fact that Democrats, liberals, progressives, leftists have to play politics better. And we have to be willing to engage in hardball. That means that if we have to add DC and Puerto Rico as states the moment the president is inaugurated, do it. If that means that we have to put through a constitutional amendment to abolish the electoral college, do national automatic registration, redistrict the hell out of it. If we take these state house, redistrict the hell out of this country, do it. If we have to add more federal circuit courts and district courts, do it. Because at the end of the day, the one thing that we have to recognize is that whiteness has never abided by whiteness's rules. And we've always boxed ourselves in. And I look at the president up there. I was watching him during the debate, and I realized this is a man who walks in impunity, right? Look at Mitch McConnell, his road dog, walks with impunity. And something happened to Mitch McConnell's hand. I know it's the judgment of God. Now, we don't want to deal with that later, but it's the judgment of God. I know it for a fact. It's a plague. I know it. But we have to be unapologetic about that, because we're always worried about, well, if we go too far, then the rest of the country is going to no. The problem is that they rigged the rest of the country so that they could always win. The fact that the Senate, 38%, that the Senate Republican majority only represents 38% of the national population is a problem. And so if we don't ever want to see something like Trump again, or if we want to push out the number of years it will take for the country to produce another Trump. We have to be a lot more smarter and unapologetic about how we play politics.
I feel pretty unapologetic about two things. I'm thinking about the New York Times article that ran maybe in March or April that printed 100,000 names of all the people that died from COVID. It is now twice that number. We have not had a national mourning, a national lamenting, a week, a day, an hour of silence, of reckoning with what it means to have lost that many people in this country. The absence that represents. I remember earlier on when the pandemic started, we were reading reports about villages in Italy that were kind of wiped out or just particularly hard hit. And those numbers pale in comparison to what we've seen in the United States at this point with COVID cases. This week, Ohio having the most COVID cases increasing by day. We're literally breaking record numbers than what happened back in March and April. Yeah. So I feel unapologetic about the fact that this country needs to, one, mourn and lament the people who have died from this, but literally take whatever measure needs to happen, whether it is another shutdown, which Trump said he would not do. He said that he would not shut down the economy again. He would not force people to close down, would not institute a national mask mandate. Vice President Joe Biden would. But drastic times call for drastic measures. And it is hard to be in the house. It is hard to have our lives disrupted, but it is also hard to think about more than 200,000 people dying from this virus because of a lack of leadership and falsifying science and not believing scientists when they put that forward. So whatever we need to do, I feel unapologetic that needs to happen. The other thing that I am unapologetic about is figuring out where the parents are of these 545 children who were separated from them. That is a crisis. I'm struggling as someone who comes from a very large family, who has nieces and nephews, who has brothers and sisters, who is in a family. I cannot fathom what that is like. That is such a stain on this country. But it unfortunately is not off-brand for this country. We know what family separation has looked like in a historical context with our ancestors. We know what it looks like for young people who are incarcerated, and we are now seeing what it looks like now for people who just so happen to not be U.S. citizens, who are trying to seek a better life. And so I hope that whatever happens under the next administration is that something of that nature gets figured out, and that we have common sense immigration policies in this country that don't dehumanize and criminalize people for trying to seek a better life. And so those are the two things I'm unapologetic of. And a third, just, listen to Black women.
Yeah.
Period. If we're in leadership, if we're doing what we're supposed to do, like, we're the tide that lifts everybody up. And so just give it the program. Last thing.
Agreed. Claps all around. I thought all of that is great to be unapologetic about. I think that, and even this goes back to the larger conversation about what we need to talk about at these debates. Like, there are things that impact people's lives every day. My husband is an immigrant, family of immigrants, whole thing, where I prior to dating him had no reference point for immigration process, didn't mean anything to me. And so learning so much in the time that I've been with him, understanding that, like, this is something that actively impacts people's day-to-day lives, one, but also keeping in mind that, like, this is not, Democrats need an actual strategy. I feel like since the Gang of Eight, we haven't even really attempted. And like this is egregious. And honestly, just to segue right now into Drunken Love, because I feel the rant coming anyway. Something that really stuck out to me, this might have been a year or 2 years ago, I can't remember. I was walking through the African American Museum of History and Culture. And I was thinking about citizenship. And how so much of our struggle as Black people in this country has been for full citizenship and having it recognized, right? And having the full rights that we have as citizens in this country, right? And unfortunately, America uses citizenship as a way to discern humanity, as a way to gauge whether or not you should be treated like a person. And honestly, it's egregious, and it's a human rights violation that the idea was even thrown out there to rip apart families, which we know also happened in slavery, solely because of their country of origin and that they were brown. I think, speaking of like national mourning and things like that, this administration has done things that are awful and horrible. And that's not to say that America doesn't already have an awful history, because we know that we do. But there's something particular about the evil that these people have done from 2016 to 2020 that I think we haven't even really grappled with. And honestly, we probably need to be like, there might need to be like a UN intervention about. And in keeping all of that in mind, I feel like some of the worst things that happened, we won't even know until there's a new administration. Because I even think about the global pandemic team and how the fact that the president of the United States disassembled the global pandemic team 2 years ago. And for some reason, that was not headline news. That was not a big deal. And so God only knows what's on the cutting room floor of these newsrooms that they thought wasn't relevant at the time. And that's not shade to them necessarily. But it does say like why these people have done terrible things in broad daylight in front of the entire world. And as a country, we will be held accountable for that. Mm-hmm. And it's unacceptable to use citizenship as a reason to disregard people's lives. Absolutely unacceptable. And it cannot be stood for in any space where you have the audacity to show up and pretend to be the moral leader of the world. Absolutely not. Yeah. Tonight I'm drinking.
No, I was loving it. I was hoping you had more. I was like continue.
Right. I'm having cran, pineapple, and tequila because, y'all, it's been a week. It has been a week. But Sakeenah, what are you drinking tonight, and what would your rant be about?
This is so boring. I'm drinking H2O. Yes, clink, clink. It's been a long day. And I feel like when I'm stressed from school and things like that, there's time for wine, but also just, be hydrated first before you partake in the libations. We were supposed to say a rant that we would go off on about, or?
I mean, it's 2 minutes uninterrupted to use as you choose. Oh, yes, girl.
One of the things that I'm thinking about right now, just how do we move forward into the fall? How do we prepare ourselves for darker times, literally outside, just in terms of like the seasonal changes, and how do we keep ourselves safe? I think for a lot of people, this is going to be the first time that they're not going home for the holidays, that they're not spending Thanksgiving, Christmas, these very, very typical American holidays with family. And if they do, how do they go about that safely? As someone who is from the great state of California, I will be here still in DC, going into the holiday season and things like that. And so I think, the administration is not thinking about this in the way that I am, but just thinking about it in terms of, how do we support families and how do we make ourselves best equipped to do that? But also as like a 27-year-old millennial who like lives alone and is thinking actively about just like how to keep my peace and focus on school and be politically engaged and vote and like talk to my friends and like be supportive. Like those are really hard things to manage. And so I just really want to encourage people to take care of themselves, to lean on their networks, to think about their health and well-being in the best way possible. I think that there was a term coined called pre-election stress syndrome or something like that. It was circulating on the Twitter streets and people were writing about it. And so folks are going to be stressed. We are already stressed. The year itself has been stressful. Dealing with the pandemic has been stressful. And so for folks who are either doing mail-in ballots or going to go line up at the polls on the day of election, we need to take care of ourselves and we need to take care of the people that we love and who are close to us, because it is hard out here and it's going to keep being hard out here. Really, even if Vice President Joe Biden becomes the president, like we still got to like weather our way out of this. You know what I mean? We are in this for the long haul. And so how do we take care of our bodies? How do we take care of our minds, our communities, the people that we love in the best way possible so that, we stay alive. Literally, this is a life and death situation. And so that's my rant. I'm just, trying to do right by me and the people that I love, so that, we can celebrate and not get back to an old normal, whatever new normal looks like, that is safe, that is, centered on our safety and just in taking care of each other in the best way that we know how. So I'll keep drinking my water and taking good care. And that's my rant.
Sounds good. And you, Travis, Mr. Randall, what do you have for us?
Red wine, similarly, it's been a rough week. I will say, I will echo Sakeenah's comments around pre-elections syndrome, stress syndrome, because I'm concerned about it. Vice President Biden wins, this man's still going to be in office for another 2 months, and he don't look like a person who takes rejection very well. We'll just leave that for what it is. I think for me, my rant would be the frustration I've had this whole year has been with America, and particularly white America's, this kind of cognitive dissonance that they've kind of engaged in, right? And this sense of, oh my gosh, I didn't know this happens. What are we gonna do? And it frustrates me because, one, as Black people, we are required when we come out the womb to have to know everything about white America, white interests, how their world works, and also be able to to operate and move very fluidly in our own world, right? So that's the first point of frustration. But two, these issues of inequality, inequity, discrimination, police or state sanctioned violence, these are not new issues at all. They're not new issues, but what many in this country have done, what they've done is they've decided to bury their they've willingly buried their heads in the sand to be able to say, oh, well, I was focused on this over here and I didn't know that this existed. Of course you knew it existed, right? Because we know historically white people do not live in places where concentrations of Black people live. And when it comes to certain jobs, we get it. We get that when we go to get a job, we know that there are the other standards that are not on the criteria rubric, right? That we have to live up to, but we never live up to, and that's why we don't get the jobs. Black women particularly have to go through this. And so I think this summer, this year has been frustrating because all of this I did not know. Everybody's saying it. When we look at the Republican Party, I didn't know Trump was this bad. I didn't know Trump would say this. But yet and still, I didn't know, but the silence and the refusal to actually engage in corrective or remedial behavior, it frustrates me. It frustrates me because these people will leave out of 2020, no matter what happens, will leave out of 2020. And particularly if Trump leaves and we all get that kind of false sense that everything's going to be okay again. A lot of these people who said, I didn't know about Black people being killed by the police. I didn't know that Trump was a racist. I didn't know that, we're investing in minority community. Those same people will also find a way to absolve themselves of their sin. But then we'll go back to the same behavior and put their head right back in the sand, and things will continue. And I think for me, the frustration that comes from what do we do to change the cycle, right? You have friends who are abolitionists who say tear the system down, have friends who are more pragmatic and say we can still reform our way, not to a truly liberative environment, society, but we can get close enough, right? And so my question is, how do we unravel whiteness in such a way that we can break ourselves out of this system, right? And not just break ourselves, right? Let whiteness unravel, and we, as it's unraveling, we pop out, right? We pop out of just like a seed pops out of the dirt, right? We kind of move beyond this. We don't sacrifice Black bodies, Black lives, Black joy, Black health, Black mental space to white men trying to figure out their world, and we can go off and be self-determined and be happy and prosperous, and to do away with all these silly notions that we operate under, right? So that is my rant, and I probably will chug this red wine once I get off camera. But so that's all I have to say.
Okay, I want to say, Sakeenah and Travis, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for bringing your brilliance. Thank you for bringing your time and expertise in this area. And Sakeenah, in the event that someone says, oh my gosh, she's brilliant, she's gorgeous, like how can I reach out? What are the ways in which you would want them to do that?
That's so funny. I'm on Twitter. My handle is Bazzberries, Bazzberries. Yeah, reach out on Twitter. My Instagram is private. I'm trying to, keep that for like family and friends and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm on Twitter. So send a DM.
Sounds good. And Travis, what about you?
I'm still trying to figure out if I should get my Instagram. No, let me do Twitter. Twitter. So I have to be fair. I haven't been active on Twitter in a while. I'm just kind of getting back in the zone here. So you'll see me ranting on my profile. My Twitter handle is President Randle, and Randle is spelled Randle. It's an old Twitter from college. That's the only reason I still have that. Lauren understands.
I'll say, while we're here, I do want to take a minute to say President Randle weren't you like the first sophomore ever elected SGA president in Morehouse?
Not the first. I was like the second.
Oh,
excuse me. Second or third, something like that.
Because we're here and I want to talk about it. I remember the first time I ever saw Travis. I was backstage at a pageant. If you go to HBCU, you know. And Travis was the MC. And I heard this voice and was like, who is this man talking? I come around the corner and it's Travis on the mic, and we have been friends since. And so I just want to say thank you for coming. Thank you, Sakeenah, for being here. I'll see you shortly. In that case, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here if y'all don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
That was this episode of Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. If you're interested in following me, you can reach out at Lauren Zayu on Twitter and Instagram. And you can also follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you for tuning in to Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered with host Lauren Zayu and music by Lighthouse Productions. For more information on Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered, or to review today's episode, please follow at Lauren Zayu on Twitter and Instagram, or subscribe to the Lauren Zayu YouTube channel.